More people are leaving New Zealand than ever before. It's 134,000 people departed Aotearoa. That's the highest ever recorded for an annual period.
More people are fleeing New Zealand today than at any point in its modern history. Airports are full, job boards are bare, and the same families who once bragged about living in the world's safest, happiest nation are packing up and walking away. In just 1 year, more than 130,000 people left New Zealand, the equivalent of an entire city disappearing. 80,000 of them were New Zealand citizens, the largest migration loss ever recorded. It wasn't our first choice to leave, says one Wellington mother of two, but we couldn't see a future here anymore. New Zealand, the land of volcanoes, fjords, and velvet hills, was once among the happiest countries on Earth. In 2019, it proudly held a top 10 spot in the World Happiness Report. By 2024, it had slipped to 19th. For many still living there, even that feels generous. Behind the postcard scenery, life has become brutally expensive. Rents devour paychecks. Groceries cost as much as imported electronics. In Auckland, the average house price has soared to nearly 1 million New Zealand dollars, more than 14 times the average annual income. To buy a home, a young person would need to save every dollar they earn for 14 years, with nothing left for food, rent, or survival. Something has gone terribly wrong. This isn't just another story about inflation or real estate. It's about how one of the world's most admired societies, a nation built on fairness and balance, drifted into crisis. A crisis now dismantling its workforce, draining its hospitals, and hollowing out the communities that once defined the Kiwi dream. And here's the real shock. It didn't happen overnight. From decades of economic reform to a global pandemic to policy missteps and nature's fury, New Zealand has been building toward this moment for years. What we're witnessing isn't just an economic collapse, it's a social turning point and a warning to every other nation that believes paradise can't fail. So what happened to this dreamland at the edge of the world? Why are the very people who built it now giving up on it? And could your own country be next? Welcome to Geologic, where we uncover how paradise turns into pressure and what that says about the future of us all. For decades, New Zealand was the world's quiet success story, a nation that balanced social compassion with economic stability. But in the mid-1980s, that balance began to tilt. When the government launched its sweeping free market reforms, nicknamed Rogernomics, state housing was sold, utilities privatized, and unions weakened in the name of efficiency. The country modernized fast, but fairness fell behind. Those who already owned property gained. Those who didn't were locked out. Public housing stock plunged from nearly 70,000 homes in the late 1980s to barely half that number 30 years later. Wages stagnated while speculation thrived. Through the 1990s and early 2000s, leaders of every stripe kept faith in the market. They assumed private developers would solve shortages and competition would regulate prices. Instead, construction lagged where demand was greatest. And investors discovered that houses earned more sitting empty than families did working full-time. By the 2010s, housing had turned from shelter into asset, and the Kiwi dream quietly divided into two nations: owners and renters, insiders and outsiders. The paradise everyone trusted had been monetized. 2 generations later, those early policies matured into crisis. New Zealand now ranks as the least affordable housing market in the developed world. According to OECD data, the median home costs more than 10 times the average income. In Auckland, that ratio climbs beyond 14. Between 2000 and 2024, the average house price jumped nearly 400,000 New Zealand dollars, 4 times faster than wages. In 2021 alone, prices surged 32% after the central bank cut interest rates to record lows. What was meant to spark recovery instead ignited speculation. A young couple earning 65,000 New Zealand dollars each would need to save every dollar for more than a decade to afford even a modest home. Meanwhile, investors and short-term rental owners snapped up the supply. Airbnb conversions multiplied. Land use laws under the Resource Management Act throttled new builds in major cities. For renters, the story is no better. Average weekly rent in Auckland hovers around 650 New Zealand dollars, and nationwide it averages 575 New Zealand dollars. Almost half of tenants spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and 1 in 4 spend over 40. That leaves nothing for savings or hope. A young buyer put it simply, Every open home feels like a lottery I'll never win. Before we move on, what's housing like where you live? Could you still afford to buy there, or is it slipping out of reach the same way it has here? Drop your answer in the comments, because this isn't just New Zealand's story anymore. When a roof becomes unaffordable, everything beneath it follows. Between 2021 and 2024, grocery prices climbed 28%. Electricity bills rose 24% in just 5 years. Fuel tax cuts ended, pushing transport costs to record highs. And consumer prices overall jumped 7.3% in 1 year, the steepest rise in 3 decades. A loaf of bread that cost $1 New Zealand dollar and 20 cents in 2019 now sells for $2.60. Fruit and vegetables spiked 17% in just 3 months. The Ministry of Social Development reports that 1 in 9 households regularly skip meals, while food bank demand has increased 76% since 2021. Yet, wages have barely moved. Average pay rose about 5%, while inflation ate 7%. Even a 7.6% pay bump in late 2023 only brought most workers back to where they stood before the crisis began. What this means isn't measured in charts. It's seen in supermarket aisles where parents put items back, in petrol stations where drivers top up by $20 instead of $60, in dinner tables where quiet frustration replaces conversation. This is how a nation built on balance slides into exhaustion, one receipt at a time. When everything costs more but paychecks stay the same, frustration turns into flight. Between 2021 and 2023, the average wage in New Zealand grew by just 4 to 5%, while prices soared beyond 7%. For most workers, that meant a real pay cut, a silent shrinking of life disguised as normalcy. At the heart of this problem lies a productivity puzzle. Each New Zealander contributes nearly 20% less output than the average OECD worker. The result? Fewer rewards for more effort. People aren't lazy. They're trapped in a system where hard work no longer translates to progress. Even the professionals holding the country together are walking away. A registered nurse earning 72,000 New Zealand dollars in Auckland can move to Brisbane and make 100,000 New Zealand dollars for the same job, a 38% jump overnight. For teachers, the gap is similar. For engineers, even wider. "I love my country," said one Christchurch nurse, "but I can't afford to serve it anymore." For decades, New Zealanders prided themselves on the idea of the fair go, that hard work guaranteed dignity. But when prices outpace wages and the promise of fairness fades, loyalty becomes luxury. And when loyalty dies, migration begins. Every week, flights to Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth carry away more than luggage. They carry experience, training, and future taxpayers. In the past year, over 12,000 nurses have registered to work in Australia, a 53% surge in just 12 months. The education sector faces a projected shortfall of 1,250 teachers by 2025. The technology industry already relies on immigrants for more than half its workforce. The exodus isn't random, it's targeted. It's the country's most skilled citizens, the people who make hospitals run, classrooms function, and infrastructure hold together. Economists warn that for every 1% of skilled workers lost, GDP per capita drops by about 0.15%. That might sound small, but repeated year after year, it becomes an economic slow bleed. Hospitals are understaffed, waiting times stretch, class sizes grow, projects stall. It's not just a loss of workers, it's a loss of resilience. One young nurse described it best. "I didn't leave for adventure. I left so I could buy groceries without counting coins." Be honest, have you ever thought about leaving your own country for a better life? Would you stay out of loyalty or go out of necessity? Tell us in the comments. Because when migration stops being a dream and starts being an escape, it says something deeper about the world we're building. New Zealand's collapse didn't happen from one mistake, it happened from 3. The first domino, policy. For decades, leaders treated housing and affordability as markets to manage, not promises to uphold. Public housing shrank, regulations multiplied, and local councils struggled to approve builds fast enough. By the time reforms arrived, the gap between supply and demand had become a canyon. The second domino, money. To keep the economy alive during the pandemic, the Reserve Bank cut interest rates to 0.25%. Borrowing became cheaper than ever, but cheap credit fuels expensive housing. Within 2 years, prices jumped over 32%, forming one of the largest property bubbles in modern history. Wealth soared for the few who already owned homes, and vanished for those who didn't. The third domino, infrastructure. Even if you wanted to build, the system was breaking down. Construction materials, 95% of them imported, doubled in cost as global shipping faltered. Then came Cyclone Gabrielle in 2023, a natural disaster that caused 14 billion New Zealand dollars in damage and pushed insurance premiums up 40% nationwide. Entire towns faced rebuilding delays and rising debt, while urban areas could no longer afford expansion. These three forces, policy neglect, cheap money, and brittle infrastructure, didn't just overlap. They amplified one another. Each collapse made the next inevitable, until paradise itself became a pressure chamber. New Zealand's isolation has always shaped its story, a blessing in times of danger and a burden in times of crisis. The same ocean that once protected it from global chaos now traps it within fragile supply lines. Roughly 95% of the country's building materials are imported. When global shipping faltered after the pandemic, a standard plywood sheet that once cost 50 New Zealand dollars jumped to nearly 100. Every container ship delay meant unfinished homes and higher costs. Then nature struck. In early 2023, Cyclone Gabrielle tore through the North Island, flooding farmland, destroying bridges, and erasing entire communities. The storm caused an estimated 14 billion New Zealand dollars in damage, the costliest natural disaster in the nation's history. Insurance premiums rose by 40% within months, and new risk zones made thousands of homes nearly uninsurable. Even the industries that once defined New Zealand's strength began to wobble. Tourism, which once contributed 6% of GDP, still sits 20% below its 2019 levels. Agriculture faces erratic weather patterns and export bottlenecks. The country's greatest advantage, its distance, now magnifies every global shock. Paradise is still breathtaking, but beauty can't balance the books, and geography, once a fortress, is fast becoming a wall. The government spoke of resilience, but the numbers told another story. In mid-2024, the economy contracted by 1.1%. The following quarter, it fell another 1%, the steepest two-quarter drop since 1991. Manufacturing slowed, construction froze, retail spending collapsed. By year's end, the economy was smaller than it had been 12 months earlier. New Zealand's debt-to-GDP ratio climbed toward 42%, and the Reserve Bank faced a brutal choice: raise interest rates and crush borrowers, or hold steady and let inflation smolder. Either way, ordinary citizens paid the price. Exports, once the nation's cushion, offered little comfort. China buys nearly 28% of New Zealand's goods, meaning a single slowdown in Beijing ripples instantly across Wellington. Add a shrinking workforce and declining productivity, and recovery begins to look less like a rebound and more like wishful thinking. This isn't simply a downturn. It's the slow realization that the system built to create prosperity can no longer sustain it. When costs rise, growth falls, and workers leave, even paradise begins to feel temporary. It's easy to treat New Zealand's crisis as an island story, but it isn't. The same pattern is spreading across the developed world. In Canada, rent rose 11% last year. In the United States, teachers are quitting faster than districts can hire them. In Britain, home ownership among under 35s has halved since 2000. The locations differ, but the equation is identical. Wages stagnate, housing speculates, and young people are priced out of their own future. Yet some countries have found ways to turn back. Iceland rebuilt after its 2008 collapse by investing in public housing and capping rent increases. Finland reversed its own youth emigration wave through affordable education and targeted wage reform. New Zealand could follow that path. The same nation that once led the world in environmental policy could lead again, this time in human-centered economics, if it chooses to treat affordability as infrastructure, not ideology. Because this isn't just about one nation's fall. It's a preview of what happens when modern societies let the cost of living rise faster than the value of life itself. What began as New Zealand's struggle is becoming the world's reflection, a warning from the edge of the map. Every collapse leaves behind a map of choices, and every choice, a warning. New Zealand's story isn't one of sudden failure. It's the result of slow, logical decisions that added up to imbalance. The first choice was believing that the market could replace the community. The second was confusing easy credit with real prosperity. And the third was forgetting that a nation's strength isn't measured in assets, but in the people who can afford to stay. For years, economists celebrated growth, while families measured decline in skipped meals and shrinking paychecks. Policymakers debated percentages while nurses, teachers, and builders quietly left. They didn't leave because they stopped loving the country. They left because love doesn't pay rent. Yet decline doesn't have to define destiny. Other nations have walked this road and turned back. Iceland revived its economy by rebuilding public trust and affordable housing. Finland did it by restoring wages and community welfare. New Zealand can too, if it remembers what once made it exceptional. The idea that fairness is not an ideal, but an infrastructure. Because paradise was never about scenery. It was about stability, opportunity, and belonging. And those can be rebuilt. New Zealand's fall is more than a national story. It's a mirror showing how quickly comfort can become crisis, when affordability, equality, and trust begin to erode. The world once watched this small island as a symbol of balance. Now, it watches it as a signal flare. What's unfolding here is the same pressure building everywhere, in Toronto's apartments, in London's suburbs, in California's classrooms, when homes become investments instead of shelters, when paychecks stop keeping pace with prices, and when the young stop believing they belong. The warning lights blink the same shade of red. For New Zealanders, paradise didn't vanish overnight. It was priced out, piece by piece, until leaving felt like the only freedom left. And for the rest of the world, the lesson is painfully clear. No country is immune. If you believe every nation deserves a future its people can afford, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Geologic. Because what's happening on this small, distant island may soon be knocking on everyone's door.